Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, coming at you with a solo episode today. And we are going to be getting into the waiver wire ads for week 3 and your trade targets going into week 3 of your fantasy leagues. I'm back on the mic today. The announcement that Matt alluded to in one of the videos before is that I did have the birth of my first son this past week. So I was out for about a week, but I'm back with you guys now. And looking forward to getting into the waiver wire now. So starting off with the waiver wire ads of the week, we have 2 of them. Again, we're looking at a running back and a tight end. Funny how that worked out because that was also what we were looking at last week with Dobbins and with Isaiah Likely. And this week we have Carson Steele and Hunter Henry. So Carson Steele is kind of an obvious one, right? I did want to highlight him as an ad of the week because I do think that he should be your priority and your target over Samaje Perine. With Pacheco going down, he's going to be out at least 6 weeks, broken fibula. That can be hairy to heal correctly. And, hopefully for his sake and for the Chiefs, he gets right and they get him back in 6 weeks. But I would assume that it's going to take him at least that long to get right. So if you're struggling at running back, if you lost Pacheco, obviously, if you lost Christian McCaffrey and don't have Jordan Mason, or you just need a little bit of extra flex help, you're dealing with one of these many injuries that we had in this week. Carson Steele is somebody that can just be a plug-and-play starter in your flex spot, if nothing else. And I think he's going to be the guy you want because he was the one playing already, even in tandem with Pacheco. And Samaje Perine got on the field a little bit, but Carson Steele is already playing 25% of the snaps, only less than 10 for Perine. And so I do think that a lot of the early down rushing work, the goal line work, is all going to go to Steele. And as you can see here, 6 foot, 228, he's a big back. He played really well in the preseason. I think they trust him. Also, he lost a fumble in the game this week, but they went right back to him on the next drive. So I do think they wanted to kind of boost his confidence after that. I do think they trust him still. So hopefully the fumbling doesn't become an issue, because if that's the case, he won't see the field in favor of Perine. But I do think that the upside that you get with Steele is something that you're going to want on your team. For a fab bid, I'd put about 15% on him. And again, I'm always going to go from $100 budget, right? So that's about $15 of your fab, regardless kind of how much you spent in week 1. And, if you're a Pacheco owner, maybe you go up to 20% just to lock him in. Or if you think that it could be Perine because he's the veteran presence there, maybe you go 10 on Steele and 10 on Perine. I think if you do that, you'll have a much better chance of getting Perine than Steele. But either way, I think the Chiefs backfield here is something you want to look into. And then going down to Hunter Henry, this one should have been a little more obvious, I think, in the preseason, right? He always kind of gets ranked as tight end 16 and kind of has one of these blow up weeks, but this was particularly impressive because he had 12 targets, 9 catches, and 109 yards. That's a big workload for him. He's a very talented player. And I think if he's going to be the focal point of the passing offense, he's going to have weeks where he is the number 1 option for them in the passing game, like he was this week. That's something that you want on your team, especially with how bad the tight end landscape is panning out to be right now. I don't know what's going on, but he's somebody that if you ended up with Kyle Pitts, you ended up with David Njoku, you have Ferguson, you drafted any of those guys to be your starter, didn't get lucky with Brock Bowers, who we'll talk about later in this video. He's somebody that I think you can start pretty comfortably here, and he's on the waiver wire, and not somebody I'd throw a massive bid at. I just think, like I said, he kind of always has these big weeks and then kind of goes back to the 3-4 target range, and then he'll have a big week. So very inconsistent. But I do think that, $5, 5% of your fab budget on him here is something I think is reasonable if you need a tight end. The rest of the waiver wire ads here. So we're going to start with quarterback. Obviously, the main one for our Superflex audience here, Andy Dalton. You want to make sure you go out and get Dalton. I do think in this offense with Canales that he's going to be much more productive than we saw out of Bryce Young through the first 2 weeks. And I also think the fact that he was able to bench Bryce Young this early into the season shows that he was having that conversation with the GM and ownership before the season started. There's no way he makes this move this early in the season if it wasn't already known that Canales kind of thought that Dalton beat out Young in training camp. So I do think that Dalton can be productive here. I think this is a huge boost for the offense overall because they have been awful. So I think Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, both guys that, you can start with a little bit more confidence. Chuba Hubbard, hopefully the offense overall will be operating more efficiently. And so Chuba Hubbard can have a little bit more value here. They can sustain drives. Hopefully they start to top their 3 yards per play that we've been seeing through the first 2 weeks. So if you are playing in a Superflex league, especially your 12-team leagues, you want to make sure you go and get Andy Dalton. If you want a speculative add at quarterback, I did add one more name here. Tyler Huntley signed to the practice squad for the Dolphins. We don't know how long Tua is going to be out. It could be 2 weeks. It could be 5 weeks. It could be 8 weeks. We don't know what their plan is going to be with him. And I do expect Skylar Thompson to start this week, but I think that there's a pretty good chance that if Tyler Huntley gets caught up with the playbook, that they will turn it over to him, especially if they're losing, and especially if Skylar Thompson doesn't look very good. Like, I think we all expect him to not look very good. So Huntley is somebody who made the Pro Bowl a couple years ago. He filled in for Lamar Jackson that year. He did pretty well. He's got some rushing potential here. So not somebody I see getting into the top 20 quarterbacks ever. But if you are struggling in a Superflex league, say you only drafted 2 and Tua got hurt, right? And you're looking at Andy Dalton as your possible starter. If you want a second or a bench speculative add here, I think Tyler Huntley's your guy in Miami. Going over to the running backs, Bucky Irving here, 41% owned, kind of, I think, would suggest that he's owned in most competitive leagues. So if you're sitting here saying, oh, there's no way Bucky Irving's going to be available, I hear you. That's why he's first. Just in case he is available, go out and get him. He looks very good. Rachaad White dealing with a injury in the game. He did come back into the game, but he has not looked very good on the ground so far this year. I do still have a lot of faith in Rachaad White, so I don't want this to be like a hit job on Rachaad White. I just think that they're clearly both going to play. Bucky Irving's been on the field, has gotten double-digit touches, so I think that he's somebody that you definitely want on your team in the event that White is more hurt than we think, and is also probably one of the more premier handcuffs, because if anything were to happen to White and missed any time, Bucky Irving's an immediate plug and play. So with that same concept here, right, Braelon Allen. Braelon Allen's only 20% owned, and he needs to be 100% rostered. This is not somebody that should be on waiver wires for anybody that owns Breece Hall. If you own Breece Hall in your league and Braelon Allen is available, you have to make sure you get him. I don't know who you're going to have to cut or what you're going to have to do, but make sure you get him onto your roster. We saw what he could do this week in limited touches, right? Got like 10 touches, but turned it into 55 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had a receiving touchdown on a screen. He had a rushing touchdown from 10 yards out. He didn't play much in the first week, but he was very involved in this second week. So, he's obviously not going to have a ton of standalone value if Breece Hall is active, right? But if anything were to happen to him, Braelon Allen, I think, steps in as a top 15 running back right away, can handle all the receiving down work. You see he's 235. He's very much able to handle the goal line work. So make sure if you're a Breece Hall owner, you get Braelon Allen. The third guy here we're going to talk about is D'Onta Foreman. I was shocked that he came in and got 15 touches. He was not very efficient. Jerome Ford was significantly more efficient than him. I don't understand that kind of concept at all. Ford had like all of the work in week 1. Foreman barely played. And then all of a sudden it was like Foreman had 5 carries on the first drive in week 2. So I don't know. I guess I put him on here just because he did have a pretty good volume. The offense should be decent enough around him. If he's going to get that volume, we're going to want him on your bench, especially as we get to bye weeks, especially as injuries start to mount even further. But not somebody I'm super excited about, because I do still hope that it's going to be mostly Ford's backfield. I'm not exactly sure why they did it this way this week, but somebody that we have to talk about here on the waiver ads. And then the last running back here is an injury-related ad. Joe Mixon's ankle injury isn't expected to be long-term. He's probably still going to even play this week. But just in case you're a Mixon owner, you might want to look into adding Akers to the end of your bench. If you have an open spot, if you have 4 IR spots in your league, say, and you're just filling up guys onto your IR because you got hit with injuries this week, Akers is somebody you can throw on the end of your bench if you're a Mixon owner, and just make sure that you have somebody to cover that spot going into week 3. From the wide receivers now, we have Demarcus Robinson. So I cheated a little bit on this one, right? We have a player at 56% rostered. I will try and keep these waiver wire ads to below 50%. But this one I felt was important enough because Kupp is now also hurt and possibly going to go on IR, which is rough for the Rams, but it's good for Demarcus Robinson. He's going to be the number one wide receiver here now. And with Robinson, I didn't put the rest of the Rams receivers on here, right? You got Tutu Atwell, you have Tyler Johnson, and you have Jordan Whittington. So any of those guys, if you want to add anybody from the Rams who you think is going to kind of fill in behind Robinson, I would be okay with that as well. But Robinson is the guy that I think, while Puka and Kupp are out, he needs to go to 100%. So that's why I included him this week. Now we got Juaun Jennings. This is an injury-related ad. Deebo Samuel came out that he has a calf injury. He's going to miss multiple weeks. So I do think Juaun Jennings is going to see an uptick in targets here. Brandon Aiyuk is not fully ready yet. I don't know what's going on with him necessarily, but he has not looked good so far. We're going to talk about him also later in the trade targets video. Part of the video, but I do think that Jennings is worth a speculative ad here. If you need somebody in a deep league, say you play in a 12-team, 3 wide receiver flex league, he's somebody that on the end of your bench, I think is worth an ad. Check in on him this week. He did have a pretty solid week in week 2. Not a ton of volume, but I think the volume could tick up for him in the coming weeks with Deebo Samuel out. Darnell Mooney, third guy on here. He just had a great game against the Eagles, and Kirk Cousins looked way better in this game. Got the ball to Mooney on a deep touchdown. Mooney made a good move to get into the end zone. He had a couple other deep catches on that last drive to get them down into scoring range. And he did have another potentially massive play, but he just gave up on the route. I don't know what happened. He kind of got tangled up, and instead of finishing through and running through his route, he kind of pulled up, looked back for the ball. And Cousins had already thrown it, and it was just oh, man, it could have been another 30 yards. So he had 3 for 88 and a touchdown, but that really could have been 4 for 110 and a touchdown. I do think if the Falcons' offense is going to look this good, Drake London obviously taking a ton of attention away on defense. Same with Bijan Robinson. I think that Darnell Mooney here might have a role to step into the number 3 target on this offense. Obviously, I'm very down on Pitts by saying that, but I mean, 3 for 20 for Pitts. I just don't know what's going on there. He's just doesn't seem to be that involved, especially down the field. And Mooney was the one that he was looking for, that Cousins was looking for down the field. Last guy that I put on here is Quentin Johnston. So I reluctantly put him on here. You guys all know, if you've been listening to our channel, I'm not big on Quentin Johnston. I said do not draft him under any uncertain terms, but I have to put him on this video because he just had 5 for 50 and 2 touchdowns, right? And Joshua Palmer is hurt. Lad McConkey didn't do too much in this game, and it was a lot of Quentin Johnston as the first read in the passing game. It was against Carolina. They were winning. They won the game 26-3. It really wasn't even really that much of a competition. I don't think that this is something you should be expecting. This is a $0 bid for me if you do add Quentin Johnston to the end of your bench. And then the last guy we're going to talk about here at the tight end position is Mike Gesicki. So he got 9 targets, 7 catches, and 91 yards. That was a very, very sneaky game at the tight end position. Obviously, you see his tight end 6 so far, but with a game like that and how bad tight end has been, you're going to get pushed up quite a bit. And so Burrow was looking for him a lot. Higgins is still out, Chase still getting up to speed. Yosavas had a couple touchdowns, but he really only had 2 catches for 7 yards, so it was kind of lucky. Gesicki was the one that was getting a lot of the targets in between the 20s, and we do know that he's a pretty solid red zone target too, because he's so big and he's quick. He's a very good athlete, so I think that there's possibly something here with Gesicki. Again, if you're in a really deep league or a tight end premium league where you kind of need 2 tight ends, Gesicki is somebody that I wouldn't mind at all adding to my roster. All right, so now we're going to move into the trade targets part of the video here. So we got at the top with the quarterbacks. Let's start off with Brock Purdy. So he's had 2 bad games to start the year, right? 10 and 13 points. That is not very good at all. And I do think that there's been some pretty bad quarterback play, but I think there's an opportunity here with Purdy to buy very low. I think you can possibly trade somebody that has been doing okay, that was not looked at as really even a top 20 option. Maybe you can pair Derek Carr with, like a receiver and get Brock Purdy. And that's something that I would do right now. I know a lot of people might hesitate at that because Derek Carr has been so good. But I do think that Brock Purdy, and maybe you can even sell to like push Purdy's value down even more because Debo's hurt and Aiyuk isn't up to speed, and say, look, his weapons aren't there. They're still winning games. Jordan Mason's getting a lot of carries, and try and even suppress his value a little bit in trade talks and say, look, I still want him for his upside. I do still really like him, but I'm offering you somebody like Carr, who's been doing really well, or even the guy here, right, Darnold, offering you Darnold to move up and get Purdy, because I think over the rest of the season, he will be very much worth having and be a back-end quarterback one. Second guy on this list, Sam Darnold. I think if anybody is in your leagues is not looking at Sam Darnold as a starter in a 2-quarterback league, you need to go and get Darnold, because he is absolutely a starter. Sell the Justin Jefferson quad injury, say, hey, look, he's going to be hobbled. Jordan Addison's out kind of with an ankle and not playing well, or not playing at all right now. And see what you can get, or see what you can do to get Darnold, because I think he's somebody that you can start, and somebody that I think is going to be able to be started with confidence moving forward, because he had 19 points this week against the 49ers. He had that massive pass to Jefferson for the 97-yard touchdown, but he had 55 air yards on that throw. I mean, he threw it over the heads of 2 defenders. And Jefferson obviously did the rest after the 50-yard line, but it was a very impressive throw. I do think he's kind of made Josh Naylor a thing. So, he's going to be getting TJ Hawkinson back in like week 5 or 6, probably. I think that this is only going to get better for Sam Darnold, and potentially even be consistent from him moving forward this season. Moving over to running backs, we've got Rachaad White. I mentioned him in the Bucky Irving section, but I do think that White off to a terrible start, right? I mean, he had like 15 carries for 30 yards in week 1 and like 10 carries for 20 yards in week 2. He has been horrible on the ground. There's a chance that whoever drafted him is just out on him now. They were very high on him in the draft, or got him in the in your superflex leagues, 4th, 5th, 6th round, somewhere in there, depending on how your league valued him. And I think obviously when you can get somebody with that much draft capital at a very low price, right? You're buying very low here. If they don't want to sell them low, then just tip your cap and say, fine, we'll talk next week. We'll talk next week. But I do think this is somebody that you do want to get. He also didn't really have the greatest start to last season, but then kind of picked it up. He got his passing game role settled. And Baker obviously looks great again this year. Godwin looking even better than he did last year. This offense is humming. So you want the starting running back here, especially with somebody as much receiving upside as Rachaad White. Second running back here is Rico Dowdle. This is a little bit frustrating to see him split evenly with Ezekiel Elliott, but I don't know that that's going to continue. Elliott is old, slow, and Dowdle has looked significantly better than him. They've been in almost an exactly 50-50 split. I think they both have 20 touches through the first 2 games. They are playing almost exactly the same number of snaps. They're running the almost exact same number of routes. So I do think getting him more integrated into the offense has been part of their early season game plan, part of the reason why they signed Zeke. And I still have hope that he is going to take a more prominent role as he continues to show he's the more efficient runner. So if you can get Dowdle, and again, this is a small time deal, right? You are trying to get him at a discount. If somebody's willing to trade a bench receiver, or if you're able to trade a bench receiver to get him, if you need a little running back help, or if he ended up on a team where they have 4 or 5 running backs, and you can kind of get him as a kicker to a little bit bigger deal where you're taking on 2 guys, but he's the second guy, that'd be something that I'd possibly be looking to do with Rico Dowdle. At wide receiver, again, we just talked about Juaun Jennings in the waiver ads. So Brandon Aiyuk, I think, is somebody that your window to trade for is closing rapidly. He's going to get up to speed. This isn't something that is going to continue all year long. The 49er fans are frustrated. I'm sure his fantasy owners are frustrated that he hasn't done anything. There's a chance that he's on a fantasy team that's 0-2 because he commanded so much draft capital and has done nothing. Like, he would have been better off starting Rashid Shaheed both weeks, type of thing, right? And so I'm sure they're frustrated. And with the Debo injury, I think he's going to start seeing a lot more targets here. Debo is kind of integrated as that top option, but I do think that Aiyuk is somebody that if you can get now, and again, this is somebody that I'd probably try and buy really low on. You're trying to give up two players to get him, maybe your flex guy and a running back, or like a bench running back. Maybe you have J.K. Dobbins and you can convince whoever has Brandon Aiyuk that they need some running back help, right? And you can get Aiyuk straight up for Dobbins. I wouldn't think that that's a crazy idea, and I would want Aiyuk there. So check in on the Aiyuk owner. I'm going to be doing that in my league this week. So Aiyuk, a really good, really strong trade target in my opinion. Tank Dell, I think he's somebody that you can go after. Look at he's wide receiver 62 right now. I mean, he has done nothing. But in this game, he did have quite a few air yards again. He played about 70% of the snaps. So again, a pretty good snap share for him. Stephon Diggs is not doing much at all down the field. All his targets are really close to the line of scrimmage, really low ADOT, really low air yards per game so far. And so I don't know that I expected that. I kind of thought he was going to be on the outside playing down the field, but it seems like Tank Dell is taking that role as the number 2 next to Nico Collins down the field. They just missed on like a 70-yard touchdown. I don't know what happened. Tank Dell kind of like, maybe Stroud threw it a little bit high and a little bit behind him, but if Stroud would have kind of just put it on him out there, he was running left to right across the field, a broken play. Stroud rolled out to his right and kind of flung it back across his body a little bit. But, you know, he only ended up with 1 point in this game. If he scores on that play, his outlook looks a lot different, and the owner is not worried at all. But there's a chance that Tank Dell owners are very worried. And if you can get him again for cheap, flex guy, and kind of upgrade your flex to a Tank Dell, I think that's something that you should be looking into doing. These next 2 guys, I get it if you're not interested. This is something that I need to put these guys in here because I had these guys both ranked inside my top 25. At the end of the, like when we did the top 25 towards the end of the draft season, I didn't have them in my top 25 because a couple guys like Rashee Rice had moved up in front of them by the end of draft season. But Amari Cooper has been horrible. Like, I don't even know what to say. He's got 9 and 8 targets, so he's getting the volume. But like Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore outproduced him this last week. He dropped the touchdown in week 1, and then he just has not been able to connect at all with Deshaun Watson. I don't know what's going on. There was like visible frustration in the huddle in week 1 with the play calling, but again, he is such an established player. He's got the volume both weeks. There's no way he's going to keep this pace of like 30% cash rate. He's going to improve on that. He's wide receiver 85. There's a chance that whoever has him is thinking drop, is thinking like, I literally can't play this guy. I can't do anything with this guy. So if that's the case, and again, another player that you can upgrade your flex, your wide receiver 3, I think that he's somebody that is worth trying to acquire now. If he continues to be bad, then okay, I'll take the L on that, I guess. But I don't think he's going to be. And in the event that Watson ever gets benched, he's going to get astronomically better with Jameis Winston under center. So go out and get Amari Cooper. George Pickens, I think with Justin Fields and the way that these 2 games have played out, he hasn't needed to do hardly anything. Fields had like 117 yards total in week 2, and Pickens had a touchdown that was called back to a penalty that I thought was pretty tick-tack penalty. So he almost had a better game than this. He's still very explosive down the field. Russell Wilson is still coming back and is going to be the starter for this team. And I do think when that happens, the connection between him and Pickens is going to be better than the connection that we've seen between him and Justin Fields. So I'm not worried about Pickens. I think the downfield work is going to be coming. And I do think that after 2 weeks, we do see that he is the featured piece of the passing offense. So even though he's wide receiver 41 so far, even though he's been really bad, go out and try and acquire him. I would be more surprised if anybody was panicking too much on Pickens versus like Tank Dell or Amari Cooper. I think Tank Dell and Amari Cooper would be easier to acquire at this point than Pickens, but Pickens is somebody that I probably would go ahead and pay a little more for as well. Like if you have to pay like a wide receiver 3 price, you have to pay a starter for him. I think that that's probably a reasonable expectation at this point in the year. And lastly, we're going to get into 2 tight ends here. Obviously, one of them is a huge name, but the first guy I want to talk about is Brock Bowers. I'm 2 weeks into the season, and I am taking the L on my preseason take on Brock Bowers. I said push him down. I had him as tight end 13. I didn't want him as a starter. I wanted to try and pair him with Njoku if you were the last person in your 10-team leagues to be taking a tight end. And I was flat wrong. And I'm sorry for that because that is such a bummer based on his usage and based on how good he has been through the first 2 weeks. I put him on here because if anybody in your leagues that has Brock Bowers does not think that they have a top 5 tight end and you can get him for that price, you need to do it now, right? If you got a Kyle Pitts, if you got an Evan Engram, if you got Mark Andrews, if you got a Dalton Kincaid, any of that level of tight end, and somebody will trade you Bowers for that player plus like a bench running back or receiver, and you can give up two guys to get Bowers, or if you give up like one of your starters possibly just for Bowers, I think you need to do it sooner than later, because there's a chance here that he just ends up being the best tight end in the league this year. And if you could trade for him at this price, you are going to look back and wish you had done it. So I just wanted to highlight that. I don't think you're going to be able to get him. I honestly don't. If I had him, there's no way I'd be giving him up right now with how bad tight end has been. So just check in on him with whoever has him. Maybe the last person to pick a tight end also, I don't know, Jake Ferguson. And they have faith in Jake Ferguson. He's coming back this week and you can get Bowers from him. But otherwise, I feel bad for not recommending Bowers, not pushing him up into the top 10, making him like a highlighted piece for the tight end position in the offseason. And the last guy we're going to talk about here is Travis Kelce. If you can get Kelce, I think at this point it's worth it. He has done nothing, right? 3 catches in week 1, 1 catch in week 2. And that's not going to continue. He's still been playing on a ton of snaps, right? We thought he might have a scaled back usage because he's getting up there in age, but he really hasn't. He's been on the field a lot. And with Hollywood Brown now out for the entire regular season, I just don't see a way that this is going to continue, right? Pacheco is also out, so there's going to be maybe some more targets to be spread around that were short area targets. Kelce's going to be fine. I definitely would want to try and get him. Again, if you were down in the Pitts, Engram, Kincaid, or even down in Njoku or Ferguson, if you have any of those guys, right, basically back half tight ends, you should be trying to trade up to get Kelce right now. This is the prime time to do it. All right, and with that, we have completed our week 3 look at the waiver wire and trade targets, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.